joined by Karin Gieselhart, who is the candidate for the Sustainable Australia Party in the upcoming by-election in the seat of Bega. Karin, we're really pleased to have you here with us this afternoon. We have sent through a series of questions and we'll just get straight into it if that suits you.
Yes.
So our first question relates to that perennial issue of housing. We know that housing costs are skyrocketing right across New South Wales and certainly in the electorate of Bega. Homelessness is on the rise. Our homelessness services at the front line are not able to meet demand, and there's basically not enough social housing. So what are your party's plans to address this very dire situation?
Well, the Sustainable Australia Party, being a independent, community-based movement from the centre of politics, wants policies to be based on science and evidence. And the evidence is that we have not invested enough in social housing, that we have policies at both the state and mostly the federal level that favour investment in a distorted way. We would like to end all that and also see housing as a basic human right, and it shouldn't just be another angle of the economy based on endless growth. If we stop and take stock of where our population is going, of what really the limits are to what we can manage, and then don't overstep that, then we would pull back to a situation where the resources could go where they need to go, into providing basic shelter and housing for people, and also renters' rights, and eliminating some of the distortions that occur in the rental market. But it also has to be said, and I was very glad to see that NCOSS made the link between COVID and welfare and climate change, because the way things are going, they're talking about climate change-induced inflation, and that plus population has been shown to be driving the limits of the housing sector, plus the economic distortions, that we also need at this time to look at different models of housing, perhaps, different ways in which it's not just as relationships and a lot of other things are no longer one size fits all. It's no longer either you're renting or you're owning. Maybe there are different cooperative models. Maybe there's different forms of co-housing, which have been experimented with everywhere, elsewhere, and where we need to kind of become a more resilient community by really learning what we can about what works and how we can eliminate the situation. Of course, it's so connected to all the other issues in your questions. I know we have very little time, but it's related to how education, it's related to training and healthcare and aging society, all of these things. If we need to look at these things holistically.
Yeah, look, as you say, all these things are related, and I think during COVID we've certainly seen the social services sector really step it up to support the most vulnerable in the community and keep them safe. But the sector is absolutely at capacity. It's not able to respond to level of demand, and it's having real problems with recruiting and retaining staff because of poor pay and conditions. So how would you and your party champion the work of the sector, including that of local First Nations organisations, and ensure that these vital services get the support, the recognition and the resources that they require?
Well, I think the community has the answers to these things, and the community, if asked in an honest way and with transparent data about what is working, what isn't, the community will come up with innovative ways to use the resources that are available in a more productive way, and a way that builds community cohesion and helps the community to work with the social services that are available, because in effect, to a certain extent, if we keep doing things the way we've always done them, the need for social services in a time when different economic forces are again exacerbating the gap between those who have homes and those who don't, and those who have adequate social support and those who don't. We need to really, we're going to never have enough services to meet those needs unless we start looking at things differently and in a very positive way to say, community has the answers. Let's talk to the community. Let's see what works. Let's be honest about what resources we have. And let's see if we can't do things that help us to learn and adapt and expand in a positive way the whole idea of what it means to live together in a community. For example, I'm very interested in the idea of small-scale eco-villages where people can maybe share some basic equipment and maintain it and learn to keep things going and grow some food. There's a wonderful project in the Eurobadala called Veggies for All, which offers a veggie bed and soil and plants and training to people on low incomes. And that's a very positive thing to do, which is, so that's again part of us turning towards the good things rather than trying to fight against and all these bad things. We need to kind of reorient our whole social perspective, I think, at this time of, as the community has done during the fires, you know, it's wonderful.
So we have seen that women have been particularly impacted by COVID, be it because of increased caring responsibilities, greater job loss, or the rise in domestic violence. So what will you do to advocate for better support for women and children in your electorate and to address the issue of domestic violence?
Well, it's interesting because when I joined the public service 30 odd years ago, and in the Office of the Status of Women as a journalist, we were promoting a national program about violence against women. It was translated into a lot of languages. There was special programs aimed at Aboriginal communities. And here we are so many years later. I can't say whether things have really improved or not. I don't know. It's a perennial problem. It's a horrible problem. It doesn't seem to go away. And I think education, starting from primary school, on what does it mean to have a respectful relationship, about the turning away from any forms of bullying or violence from either group, gender, whatever, and making sure those support services are there. But I think it has to come from, again, expanding education. And if we could again look at the education sector and fully support free education for all, then that would give women a leg up to get the better jobs and to be more confident and to also learn to deal with these things, stomp on them, you know, as they arise. I mean, we need to build women's confidence and strength. And that often comes through education, and it's a very empowering thing, you know. So it's again a multifaceted problem. I think young men mostly are very respectful of women. I think they, as you know, also need to embrace a more healthy relationship model. And it's a long-term thing. It's not something, you know, that can be stamped out overnight, but it's a huge problem. And as we know, sometimes it's the people in positions of authority in institutions that are actually not helping women at all. As we've seen in the Catholic Church, dare I say.
Yeah. And look, I think people might be surprised to know that there's a surprisingly high proportion of children in the Bega electorate growing up in poverty. And we know that that places them at greater risk when it comes to abuse, neglect, and poor educational outcomes. So, what are your policies to support parents and to promote children's well-being?
Well, again, need to support the welfare sector, need to support the intergenerational pressures that often put women in the squeeze box between caring for children and caring for their parents. Um, Making sure that public housing and rental rights are adequately served, making sure that people have a decent living wage if they are on welfare, making sure that the education and health facilities are there, as well as the counseling services so that kids who are at risk are helped early on in the piece, and that our resources are going into programs, again, that the community often knows what the solutions are that will help people to build that resilience. Now, I'm part of a group of women who either are or have been single parents in my little neighborhood, and we support each other. We share food. We grow things together. And you know, I was a single parent for a long time, and I had no support, and I had no help. So I'm very keen to see that what women can do and communities can do in a positive way to to build that sense, and it can even come through things like the arts, where people participate in creative and cultural activities, as we see with the Aboriginal arts community here in Maruya. These things are all very important to a strong social cohesiveness.
Mm. I did want to touch on the issue of emergency responses, given that we are in the midst of a pandemic. The research tells us that top down emergency responses can suffer from a lack of local knowledge. It can either be a case of too little, too late, or too much, too soon, or too little, too late. What do you think are the key issues in developing disaster preparedness and emergency response systems that actually work?
Well, it comes to also where we place housing and how we design housing. That's very important, both public housing and private housing. I mean, I'm trying to get a house finished here at Maruya, and I will be putting sprinklers on the roof, and trying to clear the big trees around the area. So that, I mean, that's bushfires. Now, I'm a member of the SES in Maruya, which mostly deals with storms and floods, but I know there is a great unmet need for say people to just, especially older people, to maintain their own homes. I mean, it's one thing for people to stay living in their own home, but they need the maintenance and the support, which the SES cannot provide because we are, in fact, volunteers ourselves,
Mm.
and a lot of them are my age or even older. So, getting, again, the community has the wisdom and the preparedness and prevention, as in health, is very, very important. And I know at the SES for a while, we were trying to locate someone in different localities who could just be in contact with us in the event of a serious storm or flood. And just know that that person would be our point of contact. So there's ways of developing those, what I call resilience webs, which are very organic in a community. And that is not a top-down approach. I also appreciate that, you know, groups like the SES have an enormous logistical infrastructure, which does allow them to coordinate with the police and the fire brigades and all of that sort of thing. And I think they pulled together pretty well during the bushfires, because they know each other, because they have personal connections. So there's a level at which certainly I think the top down people know that it really comes from the community, but encouraging people to prepare themselves in their houses, and again, having the community structures in place that maybe would help people keep their roofs in good repair or cut down a tree which is threatening to fall. There is nothing that can replace that, just as um, a child in an orphanage can never get the care that they would get from their own family, you know. And we, as a community, this is where redefining growth and putting resources into the things that build community cohesiveness and resilience are going to become ever more important. And I think it has to extend to things like local food production, that we have to help each other become a bit more old fashioned in a way about the way, or what used to work with communities. You know, remember the old barn raising things where people would get together and do things cooperatively. And that implies a kind of calming down of society and a kind of turning towards each other
Mm,
rather than towards external things that may be less meaningful in the longer term than just
mm.
being with each other.
Yeah, look, and we are seeing more and more disasters and crises occurring, whether it be the pandemic, floods, bushfires, or droughts. All of those we know have greater impacts for regional areas, for disadvantaged groups, and on our health system in particular. So, from your point of view and from your party's point of view, what needs to happen to ensure that our local health system in particular is robust enough to cope with these occurrences?
Well, I guess in the Eurobodala, which is where I live, which is the northern part of the Bega electorate, the level 4 hospital is critical, having good, solid medical services. And that is a kind of rolling kind of set of consequences. That means we also must have housing for the workers who are going to come here and be the experts and the nurses and the cleaners and everything else in those hospitals. There's we don't what is happening with the house prices going up so unreasonably and rentals not being available is we are at risk of putting more and more people into substandard or non-existent housing. And that is not something we want to see happening in Australia, and certainly not in the big area. So we and if we do build housing, of course it should be 10% public housing at least, as in Canberra. And of course we should put in the infrastructure for that. I see public transport as a key area in the bigger electorate that really is very inadequate, because we're not aiming for a society where everybody is dashing around all the time in their own car. That's not a solution, even if they are electric cars. We really need to, again, look at things on a systemic basis and from a all of society basis. One of the very strong points of the Sustainable Australia Party is we want to stop overdevelopment and inappropriate development. So again, things that are more village-like and have more shared facilities, where people can, you know, maybe share an electric car. There's lots of examples of that happening overseas. Australia's kind of laggard in innovating with co-housing, or and now I've heard also of there is a big demand among older women who maybe don't have all the super and that sort of thing, for maybe tiny houses. Well, I get these videos about tiny houses. Some of them are really, really beautiful and glamorous. And say small scale housing for individuals, but then with shared facilities that bring them together. In other words, everybody doesn't need a great big television screen, but if you have a nice big place where you can go and watch it together, or share a Netflix subscription or something like that. I was a member of a community here in the big electorate where about 10 families owned a property. It was just a bush property, but everybody had their own little cabin or something. But then we had a clubhouse and that had a hot shower, and it was just really a glorified camping site. But we had community connectivity, and we shared boats and that sort of thing. I mean, that was a rough and ready rural setting, but I think that can work in semi-rural and even urban settings. Co-housing has been around a long time. just as the Let's program for sharing skills, etc., has been around a long time. These things have been subsumed by a hyperactive commercial sector and distorted views of what growth means, which has taken us away from the idea of personal development as a form of growth. And I'm very big on the cultural sector as a way to keep our souls, intact. I find that very important. Singing together, dancing, making music, doing comedy, whatever. I think these are the things where our future. These are the things that hold us together. Gardening, sharing food. These are the things where my heart lies, and I think where a sustainable Australia um, we can turn to the light, if it were, and find the positive ways to relate to each other.
Karin, that does bring us to the end of the questions, but I think we've covered a lot of territory and explored some really interesting ideas, and in particular some of the challenges facing people in the Bega area. So I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I've really appreciated it, and to wish you all the best for the 12th of February.
Very much, and I hope and I wish NCOSS all the best, and I hope we can all work together for a truly sustainable Australia.